Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm super excited to be with you all here today. My name is Brendan, for those who don't know me, and super excited to welcome Nishat Akhtar, who is joining us for today's iteration of our CD lecture series. Nishat is currently working as VP of Creative at Instrument, leading creative inspiration for the company, ensuring creative excellence, providing mentorship, developing best practices, and partnering closely with creative leaders and contributing to key client projects. Her work has appeared, I'm sorry, something is going on with my screen. Give me 1 second here. Okay, her work has spanned design, including content creation and interactive experiences for Nike, Google, the NBA, and more. She keeps an ongoing illustration practice, a creative catharsis for self-expression and storytelling. Oh man, I'm sorry, something happened to my eye here. Okay. I'm sorry. Self-expression and storytelling that takes form in comic zines and editorial illustration. This practice is often self-initiated and also includes work for the New York Times, ACLU, Adobe, and members of the Condé Nast network. Nishat does this let me make this a little larger, I'm sorry, God. Nishat has a deep care for the creative community, giving talks like what you're about to see today, and also art workshops across the globe in both academic and non-structured environments. She believes in creative instinct with all the creative instinct rather within all people. So Nishat, thank you again so much for joining us today. It's great to have you, and again, welcome to Parsons. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much. I'm going to do the classic. I'm searching for the button to share my screen. I will be locating that screen to share, and then we will get to a little more of a smoother operation. So please hold while I do that classic. Let us see. Alrighty. Can I get an affirmative on the can you see my screen? And is it looking like it's full screen?
Looks good. Yeah, great. Fantastic.
Okay, wonderful. Well, hello everyone. My name is Nishat Akhtar. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an illustrator, I'm a designer, and I'm the VP of Creative at Instrument. Advance, there we go. Just a quick note for today, there is so much going on in the world. We are coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the pandemic. Obviously, what's going on in Ukraine is on my mind, and I just want to acknowledge that. I know everyone's screens are off now, but just to say to each of you, if at any point you need a moment to yourself, your screens are already off. If you need to take a moment to yourself to step away, I want to promote that not only now, but in your week to come. Next week, today's Friday, it's the weekend, so hopefully you can get some rest, but just an acknowledgement of that, because that's important. We're all doing so much, and this is an important thing to know, that we're doing so much amongst while so much is going on in the world. Cool, so a bit of a preamble, which is really just some details about myself. So I'm the VP of Creative at Instrument. Instrument is an integrated digital agency founded in 2005. That means we're 16 years old. We've grown from 4 people to 400 people strong. We have 2 offices, if you remember meeting in the real world. We have one in Portland, Oregon, which is where I live, and one in Dumbo in Brooklyn. And we work together virtually across the entire country. We are a fully remote organization. I've worked at Instrument for 4.5 years. I started as an associate creative director on the big piece of business for Google. And about 2 years ago, I started up a new team to expand the Nike business for content creation, which was really, at that time, inventing totally new processes for capturing content remotely and speaking from a really authentic voice was a shift for Nike at that time. let's see, Brendan covered this, but in the last year, I joined central operations at Instrument to oversee the design and writing discipline at Instrument, which is 125 people who specialize in the gamut of our delivery, which is product design, design systems, and brand and marketing. I curate educational programming for these groups. I join new pitches. I do new business. Sometimes I get in the work itself. I'm a coach and a manager and a mentor for the discipline. And ultimately my job, as you heard before, is to lead creative inspiration, ensuring creative excellence, and making space for continued mentorship for that part of the organization. And that's my job. You know, in my heart, I will always be an artist, an illustrator, and designer where, you know, just a creative person making things. The making of the artifact is a catharsis, both in just the making of something, the process of doing and what you can learn in that, and also how being a creative person, an artist, a designer, an illustrator connects you to others. So I want to talk about some things I'm excited about right now. That includes Build, Grow, Serve, which is Instrument's nonprofit partnership to support Black and underserved communities. Emerging Futures, which is our internship program focused on the future of our industry, the newcomers with fresh perspectives. Get in touch if you want to talk about that more. I'm excited about giving talks on creative connection. So, hey, thanks for having me. And I continue to have excitement for making artwork about my own journey, writing more, and the reciprocal nature of mentorship and design. I really believe that in conversation around design and creativity, we're all learning from each other. I'm not really in the like top-down information only comes one direction. There's so much we can learn from each other, and I really am excited about that. And let's see, things I'm dreaming about. You know, while there's so much going on in the work every day and in the world every day, as I said, I also want to share with you and hope you also have this list for yourself of things that you're dreaming of. These are things I'm dreaming of. I dream of hosting a creative residency on a piece of like beautiful land and nature someday, making more illustration and art as a direct reflection of my own story, utilizing writing as a conduit for connection, and dismantling the obstacles to creative education for underserved folks in the BIPOC and LGBTQ communities. And as a guiding principle for me, there's also the things I'm uninterested in. And I think if you identify those things and articulate them, you can avoid them, or at least notice when they're happening around you and what is creating friction in your day-to-day. For me, there are things that I'm uninterested in, which is toxic patriarchy, inaccessibility, Eurocentrism, broisms, unhealthy power dynamics, outdated norms, only chasing the money, and I'm from Philadelphia. I'm a super Philadelphia sports fan. I'm uninterested in the Dallas Cowboys. Okay, so today we're going to take an existential journey. Let me take a sip of water. Asking the question and many questions, where does a single voice belong in a collective practice? And other existential questions we ask ourselves as designers, or I do myself, maybe you are also. And really what I mean by this top level question is design is a process of information gathering, feedback loops, client service, and often teamwork. Where do we as individual creative minds and artists find ourselves amongst this collective as individuals? We'll go through a few paradigms that helped answer this question for myself. Maybe it will for you also. Things like the difference between an artist and a designer, and I've used the word artist a bunch already. What's the difference between working and making a body of work, rationalizing and post-rationalizing? And I'm going to spend some time also talking about power dynamics, because I think that's really they're everywhere, and they're within us, they're within the systems we function within, like the organizations we work, obviously the city and country we live in. So it's really important to be able to identify and understand how all of that works together to either specifically navigate how you understand your individual voice amongst this collective practice and amongst all these collective power dynamics that are at work at once. Okay, so let's just start with the two identities. I said multiple times, I'm a designer, I'm an artist, I'm an illustrator. But one of the things I think about when differentiating like parts of the creative identity is differentiating art and design. I personally got into design because I was excited about the way to do art as a career. I was the kind of kid that was drawing all the time, and I was interested in the early internet. And I learned, oh, wow, you can do this as a career. That's interesting. I went to the other P school. I went to Pratt in Brooklyn. And that's where I got my start. But thinking about these two areas, artist versus designer, especially at that time, there were two very distinct identities. And I think over time, maybe in the last 5 years or so, maybe 10, they've become more blurred in some ways. And in order to decouple the two, I often think of the question, who are you serving? Asking that to each one of these identities. Who are you serving in your work? Artists are often self-serving, seeing through a vision that is their own idea, their own style, their own materials, their own story. And a designer is someone who is serving an audience with a purpose for the experience of the design. Think e-commerce, advertising, brand design, product design, and so forth. And, I want to be careful to say, you can, and there is plenty of a specific idea, style, vision that is expressed through design. But that's most commonly in that collective manner of feedback loops, critiques, client approvals, and such. So really thinking about who you're serving individually or collectively in your practice. And I said before, I've seen these worlds really come together in the recent years where self-expression is more of a demand and desire of brands, where brands have always been expressive in their own way, but wanting and have been sort of an authority figure on the subject matter that they represent, be it a fashion brand, a sports brand, a music brand, whatever it is. They always have had their identities that are very strictly formulated to speak from, we are the authority on the subject matter. But I've seen a shift of them wanting to be more a part of a community voice, uplifting everyday voices, as influencers have become far and wide, representing a variety of communities, as it doesn't have to be somebody with 20,000 followers. It can be somebody with a smaller audience whose voice is relevant to the brands at large. So seeing how these two, almost maybe this should be more of like an infinity symbol of how artist and design, individualism and collectivism can work together far more so than previously. So let's talk a little bit about brand voice. In the many years I've worked on Nike, and I worked on Nike, I'll just use them as an example because I have spent the most time in my career working on them. I probably spent 6 years working on Nike before I came to Instrument, another couple of years working on Nike within the organization. And in these last 7 years, let's say collectively, I have seen the brand voice shift and evolve from campaign to campaign over time. Premium was the word we used to use all the time to describe our aspiration for the photo shoots, the writing, the brand voice, the appearance. What the consumer should be feeling is like a connection to the aspiration that we were putting out there. But really over time that shifted dramatically 2 years ago, obviously in the beginning of the pandemic. There was a necessity to shift from something that felt less accessible to more accessible, from premium and aspirational to an authentic human, individually uplifting focus in the language. And when I say brand voice and language, I don't just mean words, I mean how visually this is shown up too, from campaigns, big and small. It was a global conversation focused on excellence, athleticism, to a far more personal voice, to Black and Brown communities, to uplift them, number one, and to utilize people all across different initiatives within America. And maybe we'll just speak to North America in particular. We started seeing initiatives that were celebrating Black mothers, Hijabi Ballers, which is an organization out of Chicago, coming through the door, angles for support and amplification where we hadn't seen before. And so, yeah, Nike is a corporate giant, but their voice is not so, it's not so massive that it's immovable. So it's possible for a brand to evolve a sense of self, a sense of itself over time, to continue its singular voice. But like, what about you and me? The contributors of the work. What about, where is our voice in all of this? And I've asked myself that so many times. Am I shaping the brand voice? Is it me, Nishat? Is this my voice that I'm like, is it me that's contributing to this larger thing? How am I relevant in this conversation? Am I the brand? Is the brand me? And, you know, I found myself over the years attracted to working for certain brands because I did see parts of myself in them. It was like personality, voice, tone, and maybe not image, but a vibe. And I followed a vibe before I had my own sort of articulated vision. You know, I've also made a lot of my own work as a practice to maintain my perspective, rather than only gravitating to what a brand is doing and saying, okay, cool, like I work for Nike and Nike is my voice and the voice is me. As a way to maintain my own perspective and give a sense of play and opportunity to kind of do anything I want and have a real sense of creative control, which isn't always the case in client work. I am an illustrator. And like I said, when I was young, I was like always the person that was drawing, and that has like never gone away. Making space to just like draw at night or like go to a coffee shop when we used to do that. I guess that's starting again, which is so great. Really gave me the space and freedom to understand and experiment and consider who I am creatively. Uh-oh, there we go, skip ahead. And, you know, it's that practice that helps develop that voice agnostic of a client. And, you know, we heard earlier, I've worked for the New York Times and Adobe and the ACLU, but all of that work, actually, every brief that I've gotten from any one of them is really, for me, the perspective that I put like through any of that work is truly centered on myself. What is my interpretation of this? It's not a larger conversation with 30 stakeholders like at Nike, where you're talking to, you know, the immediate client, their boss, the categories, North America and global, and the geos as they overlap. This is where I could really feel a sense of creative control. And, you know, as an artist and as an illustrator, as someone that's independent, I've been in more control in my output and the stories that are told. And just like in the process of doing that, it's helped me articulate my own voice. But that's really just a piece of the exploration and journey that informs like all of the work that I've done, that I do, and that I seek out. You know, there's like the job, the work that you do in the daytime, and then for me, and then there's the work that I do at night, which is of course like freelance projects, teaching, illustration, my own artwork. And they're not like two entirely separate worlds, but they kind of speak to each other. And the goal is, for me anyway, to find that place and to have found that place where like my authentic experience as a creative person, as an artist and a designer can coexist. Which really kind of creates this clarity of where my voice fits. So again, coming back to that, where does a single voice belong in a collective practice? I think we have to think larger than project to project, but really about a body of work. Finding the tone has been such a consistent journey for me. You know, you can look, this is just a smattering of examples of work that I've done, that I've led, that I've collaborated on. There's like teams of people that have worked on this together. And it's a lot of Nike work. There's some Google work on here and some independent work. But finding the tone has been the consistent journey for me, be it playful, illustrative, vibrant, experimental, and collaborative. Like you can look at all this and get a bunch of those words, maybe not collaboration, you wouldn't know, but I acknowledge that. It's such a massive part of the process. But only after working on a series of projects, years after years, did my voice in its singularity and influence become clear. It was the body of work that was reflecting it back to me. It was like this strange mirror to myself, really. I was like, oh yeah, I know what I'm dreaming about. I know what I like and I know what I don't like. And there's this triangulation of all of that, which is the body of work that reflects back. And, you know, finding that singular voice for myself is not really one note. It's not one style, one color, one kind of typeface, though you can certainly define yourself in that way. And there are people and organizations that are very like European minimalism. That's what we do. That's not me. You know, for me, it's a conglomerate of skills and a tone that I bring to the work. It could be a visual style, but it's not exclusively to that. It's not exclusive to that. There's an evolution that is, you know, based in the values, interests, disinterests, and experience. And what I have up here is all the different kinds of work that I've done. You know, art direction is where I started working on photo shoots in fashion advertising in New York 100 years ago. Luxury fashion branding is like so bananas, everything I learned in that, and brand design and an interactive experience and illustration that I do on my own. And all of these little things, the companies that I worked for, these like moments in my career that touch different parts of it, the client relationships, they all create this like conglomerate harmony, not just like, I don't play an instrument, so forgive me if the metaphor is incorrect, but it's not just like pressing one key on a piano, it's finding that chord. And that I know to be my singular voice, the tone and perspective of the work that I have made and that I can make and that I want to make. So what I'm getting at is when I started, I didn't have a clear intention necessarily that I wanted to be a creative director or certainly not a VP someday. I just wanted to make cool stuff. I wanted to help on projects that felt creative, that people saw, that had an impact in some way. I needed a job with health insurance. I think that that's important to call out. I needed to like make money, pay for rent, have a job with health insurance, and ideally do something creative that felt cool, but there wasn't like much clarity in how I wanted to have my voice understood. I was working. I wasn't making a body of work, or I wasn't really aware that I was making a body of work. I didn't have a mission statement. My mission statement was like creative job needed and health insurance. And so, you know how when you work on a project, I don't know if you do this, but this is what I was taught the other P school. I'm sure y'all are also taught this, but you have a concept before the creation. You articulate your plan, your goals, your hypothesis, your thesis for the work before you start doing any design. I learned that so many years ago in school, and it still applies to all the projects that I have worked on. But boy, I really didn't think about my career in that way. It wasn't until there was actual time in the career that I could look back and say like, oh, okay, let me post-rationalize this series of work that I've done into the story of what I've done and where I'm going. So you start a project, you have your rationale, and you finish a project and you have your post-rationalization. And that was what it was for me before I could get so much clearer on where I was going. So ask yourself, are you pre-rationalizing? Are you post-rationalizing? Are you clear on what the plan is? Is your plan to get a job with health insurance to pay money and support your family? Like, I totally hold space for that. That's a piece of many creative stories that doesn't come up, which is like just financial reality. And, you know, for me, I didn't have like a fully baked plan for what kind of creative work I wanted to do, but it did work out. because along the way, I got very clear on the things I didn't want to do, what my interests were, and what my voice was, and the impact to the work itself. I learned not only what I was good at, but what resonated with me and how I could resonate with others. Remember when I talked about this being like a conversation, in these feedback loops and in these critiques, we're a community. We're a community in our workplace, we're a community as an industry. So ultimately what really shifted for me was from going from working to making a body of work. And, it's the ultimate existential question when you're working on your portfolio as a designer, saying like, how do I want to represent myself? I know what I've done and I understand where I want to go. And it is so painful, I have to say, and I'm sure many of you are in that spot right now, when you're asking yourself, who am I as a designer? And how do I want people to see me? How do I want people to understand me? God, that is like such a real, that is the biggest existential project that any designer can work on, I believe. I love this quote. It's, I think, a bastardization from like Kierkegaard, and there's probably a lot of other people that have said it from like Kierkegaard, and I'm sure Steve Jobs had some his own version of this, but it really articulates the position from which you stand and how you can have perspective on what you're doing or what you've done. You are in power to determine how your own voice is used and shaped. So you can look at your life as a result of the past or a cause of the future. Is your voice based on what you've done or what you have yet to do? And this is something for you to ask yourself and ruminate on. And how do you creatively show up, specifically in visual design here? Did you see a style and replicate it? Did you see a style and iterate off of it? Did you innovate a style? There's the question like, has no one ever done this thing before? Is that necessary to ask yourself? I don't know. I know some creative people really want to have an ownership of an innovation, of a visual innovation, of a creative innovation. Styles now come and go so fast because we have so much access to what's being made on social media. We have access to what is successful, and that success is often measured by what people are liking by the numbers, what people are buying by the numbers. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could say I've innovated a style. I've at least done the square and the triangle piece. Like I've seen a style, I've replicated it, I've iterated on it. I've attempted to find my own voice in my illustration work. And even in just the tone of the way I approach work, I feel pretty confident is very like Nishat, in terms of like curiosity and creativity coming together in any room that I'm in with folks. I hope people would say that. And, when I went to Pratt, we had a traditional arts foundation for anybody if you were in design as well. And we learned or attempted to learn how to look at old masters' drawings and replicate them. There's nothing wrong with replicating something that is successful. It teaches you techniques. It teaches you techniques so you understand what has worked. And ideally, we don't sit in a static place and we only replicate things. Our industry is moving so quickly. We move at the speed of the technology that we work on the platforms we work on. The minute you put something out there, it often feels like it's deprecating, not only because trends move so quickly, but also because the technology is deprecating as well. And so anyway, there's areas of design that have informed so many practices of the people and organizations you may look up to, from, minimalism to like this new kind of dopamine style, maximalism of late, which is such a response, I think, to that. When you're finding your voice, it's great to know what really inspires you. And I love to say also being aware of what you're uninterested in. That gives you room for, not only having your square understanding of where you are today, but where you may go. And what is your power? And I'm not talking about like superpowers here. This is like the classic icebreaker in a room of, hey, what's your superpower? Oh, my superpower is Procreate, or my superpower is components in Figma, or my superpower is retouching in Photoshop. I think that those are skills and expertise and to be celebrated. But I'm not talking about that here. What I'm really talking about is influence and how you are being influenced and or influencing. There's really no talking about finding your voice without talking about power. And I say this with full acknowledgement of like historic oppression of Black and brown voices, especially in design. You know, there's an industry that's been fueled by whiteness as arbiters of beauty and value. When I talked about who defines what is successful, that is commonly, driven by the dollar, and also many of the people that are in the highest positions of authority, which in this country has been just white people. And I'll say I do believe we're turning a corner, at least with brands, with like the understanding at like the ever exhausting and painful moment 2 years ago where visibility of Black and brown folks is so essential. I think every brand kind of got caught with their pants down. It was like, oh, no shit, we need to represent for all the people in this nation and all people that are consumers. That doesn't absolve any of these organizations from not giving a seat at the table, not giving a voice at the table, not paying people equally. But I do believe we're sort of in this moment of a shift to get to more pay equity, transparency, equity in power and roles and such. And I think that the door is cracked open, but understanding power dynamics is so critical as we navigate this industry, these systems, so we can know what is our power, what do we want our power to be, what is in the room right now. So by understanding different forms of power, you can identify what position you're in, what dynamics are in play, and what you can control or ask from your environment. And specifically, I'm going to talk about I'm going to talk about a set of power dynamics that have been defined elsewhere, and then we'll talk more about my own sort of view on it. But when I used to think about the word power, and I'm curious what you think about, I would think about dominance and hierarchy. But there are so many other versions of power to understand as control methodologies and also self-empowerment, strategies for personal optimization, and, again, acknowledging like where do you sit? What is the environment in which you sit? What is the domain, so that you can understand your own power and what is around you, be it helping you or hurting you, advancing you or holding you back. So social psychologists French and Raven did a body of work that is pretty well known in the 50s, 1959, maybe 1960, I don't really remember, where they defined the there's my first spelling error that I caught, 5 bases of power, to which they added a 6th. This is specific to leadership power, but we're all working within those structures. I learned about this in a leadership training at work, and I've just been so fascinated by it since. It gives so much insight to the navigational challenges an individual can have with an organization, a group of people can have with a government, and even what an individual can utilize to understand their own selves best. So let me go back and say, by understanding these different forms of power, you can learn to use the positive ones to full effect, and while noticing and avoiding negative power bases that organizations often instinctively rely on. All right, and there's 6 of them. And I'm gonna go through all of these, and I hope you just like take note of this and spend some time with it, because it's really just changed my perspective on how to use my voice as a leader, how to use my voice as a collaborator, and also just identify what is going on in the room. Okay, so the first one is known as legitimate power. This comes from the belief that a person has the formal right to make demands and expect others to be compliant and obedient. Some of the structures where we're really accustomed to this are having a boss, having a teacher, having an authority in the room. There's also like cultural, familial, patriarchal, and financial hierarchies that reinforce this concept. So be aware of that. The second one is reward, the result from one person's ability to compensate another for compliance. So maybe you practice this at home with your dog. Give him a treat, they do a cool trick. Or kid, if you've got one. I think the ever-clear dynamic that capitalism has on all of us is we work for our money. We're lucky as creative folks that we get to work to satisfy our creative curiosities. But a lot of compromise comes with that when we're in the service of others. And one of that sort of like handshake deal to be like, you know what, I'm getting to do a creative thing for my job and you're paying me, and there's certain things I'm just going to deal with because that's what it means to have a job. Have you ever heard the phrase, first you get the money, then you get the power, then you get the respect? If you haven't seen Ali Wong's most recent Netflix special, I highly recommend it. But that saying is all over the place. This is kind of what this is about. It can feel empowering when you're on the side of getting the money, the power, and the respect, but it can also be held over you for the necessity that you have to make money in your job, the power that somebody has who controls that dynamic. It's interesting to think about the best case scenario within capitalism is that everybody has access to get the money, the power, and the respect. And still the voices of BIPOC folks and LGBTQ folks in the community are not commonly the ones in the room on this. The third one is expert, and that's another one you probably can recognize pretty easily. This is based on a person's high levels of skill and knowledge. People are promoted in their jobs because they have this. They have performed, they have shown, they understand design at a high level, they can repeat excellence, they've got the reps in, they understand the process really well, they can codify it, for example. The expert in the room, can also assert themselves for someone who has a lack of knowledge, or they can invite people to understand. When I'm thinking about like dynamics in the workforce of what does it mean to be working with a creative director, some are very directive, like, you don't know something, I know it, I'm going to tell you what to do. Or that person can say, we don't know the solution to this creative problem. How can we work on this together? That's leveraging their power in a variety of ways, the legitimate one for their role, and also their expertise to understand, hey, we chose you, you probably know something too, let's all learn together. I have seen this used for both good and evil, dare I say. The fourth one is referent. This one is known as it's the result of a person's perceived attractiveness, worthiness. Like because they're more attractive, they can get respect. And God help us, we are in still such an ableist, fat phobic, and racist society, and how this form of power can be imparted on others is essential to dismantle and be aware of in the workforce. There has been a lot of preferential treatment, again, been given to white folks just because there is all kinds of assumed safety and or comfort around them. And this, I really put that in this category. You are beautiful, you are able, I understand you because I've seen your culture so many times, therefore you are more powerful, you are worthy versus everyone else, which ain't right. The fifth one is coercive. This comes from the belief that a person can punish others for non-compliance. The coercion is a really tricky one and one to spend time on. I think about these often, and I've done illustrations about them, and this one's pretty straightforward. I'm sure you've experienced this one before. And the last one, which I think was added some years after they had published their first paper, which is informational. And this power base, it results from a person's ability to control information that other needs to accomplish something. Gatekeeping is like probably the most easy way to describe this. It's like, I have information, you need to do something, I'm blocking you intentionally or unintentionally. I have information that I'm not giving you so that you can do your job best, or I'm disseminating the information that will help you do your work even better. Okay, these are like just some musings, some illustrations that I did recently, because I was thinking about all of this, and I was thinking about power and my own voice and how I've come to understand it. And when I think about my privileges and challenges and power dynamics, when I look inside and think what I've been able to use to leverage my own voice from when I was first starting till now, which covers over a decade, I think about curiosity, I think about charisma, and I think about collaboration. There's only 2 illustrations here. I didn't do one for curiosity, but I will do one. For me, I try to use my openness and curiosity for people in the world with honest charm and care for how to do, how to approach a piece of work. And that's also where collaboration comes in. I'm a leader in my job, and I feel an astute responsibility to include others and make space for their perspective. I didn't always get that in my career and in my path, but I want others to have the same. The work is better when we do it together, and that doesn't diminish a singular voice. It creates that harmony, maybe 2 chords playing or multiple chords, as I was talking about before. This awareness really helped me hone my voice, specifically for leadership, of how to, work with a client and with the team, but in co-authoring as well. Okay, so to be as existential as possible, revisiting the areas we went through today, each of these break down to some really deep questions, which is why you will notice that they commonly persist throughout a design career. It is not just when you're a student or when you're jumping from one job to the next. It literally can expand over your entire career. It has for me. So the difference between artist and designer is really the question of who am I? And you're more than just your work. You are your whole life, indeed. But when it comes to your work, determining your voice is key, which is really coming to understand yourself. And, working versus making a body of work is to answer the question, what am I doing right now and at large? The question of rationalizing and post-rationalizing is asking yourself, why am I doing this? And these power dynamics that I defined to you, and I would open it to you to explore even more that may be relevant to your own experience and personal self, is asking the question, how can I do what I want to do? And who or what is holding me back from using my voice or even coming to know it? Hold on. So, hey, your voice belongs in this creative world, and it belongs in this collective practice. Ask all the questions, but don't get stuck in rumination. I say iterate, evaluate, and just keep going. Often the direction you choose, if you choose a direction, it will pretty quickly dictate if it's the right one or not. As in, wow, this is satisfying a dream, or this is something I'm really uninterested in. Once you're a few steps in, you can look at it from all kinds of angles. Cool. So I asked so many questions. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop my sharing, and I would love to leave some room for conversation and questions from y'all.
Nishat, thank you so much. That was fantastic. And yeah, we can open the floor. I think if anybody wants to jump in with a question, or if you'd like to put your question in the chat, I'm happy to read it from there. But yeah, thank you again for the engaging presentation. It's really nice to see.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tanya, you have your hand up.
Yes, hi. I can turn my video on as well, just to say hello.
Hello.
I found it really interesting what you said about creating work versus creating a body of work, and specifically as you continue to grow as a designer and go further into maybe one specific field, taking a step back and reflecting on the body of work that's looking back at you. How do you think that I guess sometimes I worry about having diversity within an increasingly narrower field within design.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that often we're going to be rewarded for what we're doing, if we're doing it well. So if you choose to say get into product design and then you choose to get more narrow in that because you're scratching a curiosity that's interesting to you, a business is going to reward you for what you are good at. Hopefully they're also listening to like your quest and curiosity in your career, because those two things aren't always the sort of same direction. So I would when you get to that point, ask yourself, do I want to go deeper? Do I want to go wider? People talk about this T-shaped dynamic of what is your sort of general, what is your general area of understanding and what is the thing you're deep in. Some people are M-shaped where they've got multiple areas where they're deep, and the crossbar where they've got some general awareness. But I wouldn't be afraid to go deep by any means, but also, I don't know if this is a non-answer, but I would say I wouldn't be afraid to go wide. But if there's something that is like a curiosity to keep going and to keep scratching at it, that's a totally healthy thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can also leave the space for other questions, but thank you so much for a great talk. It was really, really interesting, especially about how we can look at ourselves as leaders. I thought that was really, really a nice touch.
Cool.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Joyce, you have your hand up if you'd like to ask a question, or I can read one.
Yeah, I can go. So
Joyce, hi.
thank you. Yeah, and then I just feel like when you mentioned power, there's something that's really interesting, because as someone who is no longer a student, and after a few years of work experience, I find that as designers, we actually feel so empowered because we are the one who define the brand strategy. We are the one to put the actual information out there, being like, hey, this campaign is going to look like this and this and this. But we also feel that there's always someone who is more powerful than us, like the client, of course. So I just feel like sometimes I feel this struggle that I feel powerful, and that's a great thing, but I don't want to feel like I am just putting too much of my personal thing here. I want to listen to my client. I want to listen to my audience. I want to know how the world actually functions and what they actually need. So I feel like this is a very interesting balance between what we believe in and how we should still try to be as objective as possible. And how do you think that part has been changing in your career, and how do you view this differently as you kind of work on more projects and bigger scope projects maybe?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think it goes back to the points of who we're serving. That it is when people say service industry, you think about people who are making your coffee or waiting on you in a restaurant. But we also are an industry of service. We are meant to collaborate and find the ultimate solution for, as you said, an audience, a consumer, the client. Sometimes you're servicing a client's sort of political need inside of a company, and sometimes you're actually serving that outside world problem. The thing that I have seen over time that has shifted is my ability to connect those dots more and to have a voice in the room to share back with the client, hey, actually, let's think about it from this perspective, or even ask, hey, are we trying to solve a problem with you and your bosses, or are we trying to actually service the grander community of this brand? Because even that differentiation, sometimes you're on a project and you're like, this is not what our strategy is pointing to that the audience wants, but sometimes there's a proof point that has to happen inside of a larger company that is not articulated to you as a designer or a design team. But I'm in a place where I've been through that enough where I'm able to articulate and just ask those questions. Though I do have to say at Instrument, I feel really proud that everybody, like we have every level of person in the room on our client conversations. So anyone is empowered to ask those things. But sometimes connecting those dots takes years of practice of seeing like, oh, I've been here before. And turns out we weren't actually doing solving for C, we were solving for A, even if the brief says we're solving for C. So I think conversation is a place that power has like a growth, and being in a leadership position has afforded me to speak up, and just time and experience.
Yeah, that is very helpful. Thank you. I feel like sometimes we just have to fight for this ourselves. Like we need to understand different stakeholders and how all of us agree on the same thing, and that is going to be the best situation if possible. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and just why, like what actually are we doing here, you know, and reminding everyone of that. And if all things point to, if the logic of the project is like, hey, this is what we agreed on as the North Star, and we don't seem to be serving it, perhaps there's a different North Star that we haven't uncovered, which is a VP somewhere, you know, or whatever it is.
Thank you, Joyce, and thanks for the answer, Nishat. That's I think really insightful. Actually, a lot of work ends up in that pool, I think. I'll ask a question, I think, from the chat. I think one that maybe in some ways the last couple sort of lead into, in some ways, just around like the beginning of your trajectory. Like, what was your first job, you know, after you finished your studies at Pratt, and was there something in that kind of early experience that shaped, you know, where you wanted to go in your career?
Yeah. Oh, that was like such a wild time. I want to like normalize this, which is that it took me probably a year and a half to get my first maybe 2 years to get my first full-time design job. I was waiting tables. I worked at a tattoo shop. I worked at this amazing old art supply store, which has since closed, New York Central, RIP. It was so awesome. They were open for 100 years. They just closed. I was like, I was doing all of that and freelancing at design jobs. And when I got my first design job, it was at a place called Littman, which was a luxury fashion advertising agency. The first photo shoot I ever worked on was with like some supermodels, Naomi Campbell, Kevin Bacon. And I learned so much working in that place, so much. I mean, I got to show up as like a punk on my bicycle with, I don't know, a laptop in my bag and go work on a photo shoot. I learned about photo shoots at that job. I learned about how to tell a very sort of high level pristine story for a brand through photography exclusively with no words. I think those are the two key things that I learned a lot more. I learned what it meant to work till 11 o'clock at night. I remember my dad was like, I didn't realize graphic designers worked like that. I had no idea that was what that profession was about. And I really try not to do that anymore. There are some agencies that do that as a norm, and there are some that don't. Instrument is not one of those, which is great. But yeah, it really informed just like storytelling through visual creation, whether that's a photo shoot or something else. Yeah. And I'm still friends with so many people from that place.
Thank you. We only have a couple minutes left, so maybe I'll just ask one additional question from the chat. So between your professional work and your personal work, how do you keep your creative energy up and find new ways to make? And yeah, I thought it was, I mean, I think it's interesting to kind of see the way that you define that in your presentation, but I do think that question around energy is like an important one, and something that I've been trying to capture myself a little bit. Like, how do you maintain that? Because you're also someone who's doing a lot.
Yeah, I think forgiveness. I feel sometimes I've had moments in the beginning of 2020, I was like making so much of my own personal work and working a ton. And last year I was just like uninspired to make my own work. And I just allowed space for that to sort of lay fallow. I think I'm not a machine of, I'm not a factory. I allow my creative process in my own work to emerge when it's ready, interested, curious, available. So maintaining energy overall, I think there's just like something to say there is like taking care of oneself and finding routines that feel good. In the pre-pandemic world, I used to every Sunday go to a specific coffee shop and sit there, and I would draw for a couple hours, and friends would come and we would either draw together. At that point, people just knew to find me there, which was so fun. And I'm really looking forward to getting back to some sort of routine of the creative practice that has to do with not just myself, but community. I have a great group of creative friends, illustrators and designers, and we love to get together and talk shit and draw. So I think that piece has been missing for me, and I'm hopeful to get back to that.
Fantastic. There is one more question, actually. I just noticed in the chat. If you have a minute, yeah. And for folks who need to go, it's totally we understand. But I think this is a good one, and you touched a bit on this in your presentation. But from Shanjita, I hope I'm saying that right, who is a South Asian designer, born and raised in New York City, is asking, you know, and they see them that through their journey that their community is extremely underrepresented in the design community, and they're curious, you know, what it's been like to navigate your cultural and ethnic background and the role that it plays specifically in your design work. You know, if you know, if it's a way of standing out, or if you see it as somewhat of a barrier.
Yeah. Wow. Cool question. Important, deep question. I have been you know, I'm first generation. I was born in America, born in Philadelphia. I have connections to my culture, my family who lives all over the world, in London and in India and in Pakistan. And it is, my culture is very important to me. I think when we talk about my culture, for me is really about like the first generation experience. And being of both places and not being of either. My work hasn't been so much about that so specifically, or at least so defined, until the last couple of years, where I find there's like an opportunity really to tell that story so much more. There's an appetite for and audiences that are both co-creating on the subject matter, and there's the platforms in which we can share that. You know, I think social media really democratized the voice that made that available. So I'm thinking if I'm really answering your question, I think it does and it doesn't play a role. You know, like it inevitably is going to play a role, being, for me, when I was the first woman of color creative director with the place that I work now, being a woman of color, like I have this responsibility because I have a perspective that others don't in my role. There's many times that I'm the only person of color in a room. Certainly the only South Asian in a room, and that first generation experience, being able to speak for the multiplicity, sort of a global perspective, and also uplift others who aren't represented, who have even less privilege than myself. And so that is a huge piece of my work as a leader. And then as a creative person, the empathy and excitement for telling stories that haven't been told before, be it my own, be it other cultures, and amplifying that is definitely something that I have a lot of passion for, and where I got to experience working for Nike and even Google, where Google cares so much about uplifting, you know, making the world's information accessible to all. And if you're interested in talking about this, I can talk about it forever. So just like hit me up. I'm really an open book. I want to say to all of you here, like, find me on LinkedIn or any other avenue, and we can keep talking about these subjects.
Thanks, Nishat. Thanks so much, and thanks for the question too. Yeah, I think we're a little bit over time already, so I'm going to let folks go. Nishat, I want to just say thank you so much for joining us here. It's been a pleasure to have you, and again, thank you for the excellent presentation. Our next lecture is going to be actually in 3 weeks from today, I believe, on the 25th. Please join us. We're going to be hosting Lisa Strausfeld, who is really fantastic as well. So hope everyone can join us for that. Yeah, great to see everybody, and talk to you all soon.
Thanks, y'all.